Greetings, travelers. They say money can't buy happiness, but you can buy Final Fantasy XIV and play Warrior, which is pretty much the same thing. Too bad sales on the game are still suspended. This is why happiness is so hard to obtain these days. Warrior has always been simple. Shut up, Heavensward boomers. Instead of getting mad, press Fell Cleave and receive dopamine, and then press Bloodwhetting and get endorphins. It's that easy. Warrior was my second favorite tank in previous expansion, and lo and behold, it's still my second favorite tank to play, making it the secondest tank in the game to me. Regardless of history, this job is pretty straightforward, so I can do this in an unreasonable amount of time. If you're new to tank and want something relatively comfortable, all you gotta do is unlock Marauder and unlock Warrior, and then level to 56. Speaking of leveling, you know me, I'm not here to help you with that. Other than to say, get ready to unlock Raw Intuition, and know that it gets stronger later. Warrior is a tank job, and so it likes to take aggro. There is a little button that does this for you. When grouping up mobs to spam your AoE on, you might notice that your first AoE button is not a circle shape. Thankfully, I have managed to pass basic geometry, and I can tell you that this shape is called a cone. This means that you might have to move a little bit to hit all of the mobs with your first AoE combo action, and you probably think, didn't you just say that this is a simple job? And I stand by my original statement. Pressing your second AoE button will give you a damage buff and meter, which you can spend on special moves. In this case, your AoE special move is called Decimate. Decimate is cool and all, but pressing Infuriate will give you 50 meter and turn your Decimate into a move that hits harder and has a faster, reused animation. And your AoE rotation is better than your single target rotation damage-wise on 3 or more targets. Back when the game was good, it used to be a gain on 2. Pressing Decimate is so much fun that you can do it even more if you press Inner Release. This will give you 3 Decimates to press for free, and they will always be critical direct hit. You can also press Primal Rend anytime after Inner Release for some big dick damage, but do note that Primal Rend is a gap closer, so try to target an enemy that you're already close to and not go off to the promised land and take all of the trash with you. The only other thing that you have to do is season your enemies with oregano every 30 seconds, which has a pretty cool animation that you will never get to see. Congrats, you now have half of what you need to know in order to survive AoE. Tanks have 2 parts to their playstyle, dealing damage and absorbing damage. It's time to talk about some damage soaking. We might as well start with the endorphin button. Bloodwhetting has a fuck ton of text, but it reduces damage heavily for 4 seconds, reduces damage lightly for 8 seconds, it gives you a small shield, and also heals you for every single enemy that you hit with any GCD for the next 8 seconds, with a cooldown of 25 seconds. In trash pulls, this is quite literally a benediction that also mitigates damage on a 25-second cooldown. Final Fantasy XIV does not balance AoE at all, and Warrior is absolutely disgusting in dungeons, which is actually a little bit true for all of history, but it's going to feel like you're playing with cheat codes. All other tanks still have decent cooldowns, but will manage to get scared at points. Meanwhile, Warrior is just walking around covered in the blood of their enemies and chillin', allowing you to live out all of your power fantasies. The only downside is that it's going to lure your healer into a false sense of security and forget to heal you when this falls off. Bloodwhetting is so good that you can even give it to another party member. I do have 2 versions of Nascent Flash on my hotbar, one where I can click on another party member and give it to him, and a macro that always lets me target the second player on my player list, which is always my other tank in 8-man content. Just note that for macros, you might have to mash a little bit more than you are used to get them to work, but that's not really a problem for me. You do still have other important cooldowns to use as well besides just Bloodwhetting. Rampart simply reduces damage by 20%, and Vengeance reduces damage by 30% while also dealing damage back to enemies that hit you. It is fun to do some extra damage and trash pulls while mitigating, but this is purely a mitigation button in something like Trials and Raids, and the damage is secondary, unless you want to be an optimizer. Arm's Length is a mitigation tool in trash pulls, which I only say all the time, but it can also stop you from getting shoved around during mechanics that push you into lockers like a bully. Reprisal makes everything around you do 10% less damage, which is a weak-ass cooldown in trash, but it helps with raid-wide attacks, especially in something like Savage. Just try to make sure that both tanks don't reprisal at the same time and feel sad. Thrill of Battle gives you 20% more HP and also heals you for that amount, while also making you heal for 20% more during its 10-second duration. Oh boy. You can stack it together with Equilibrium, which is a fat heal on a 60-second cooldown that also gives you a fat regen. Just note that Thrill of Battle does not affect the healing received from Bloodwhetting. Shake It Off is a shield for your party that also heals. Don't make the stupid joke. Don't make the stupid joke. Don't make the stupid joke. It will shield everyone for 15% of their maximum HP respectively, but you can increase its effectiveness by an additional 2% by getting rid of certain buffs that we've already discussed. I could do a bunch of math again and explain it to the class, but for the sake of brevity, consuming Thrill of Battle will shield you for an extra 2%, but will also make your shield personally bigger, as it is based off of your maximum HP while Thrill of Battle was active. Consuming Bloodwhetting also isn't too bad to use in tandem with Shake It Off, especially if you're towards the end of its 8-second duration, but you should avoid consuming Vengeance with Shake It Off. And last but not least, Holmgang is your invulnerability skill. When you press it, you will tether to the enemy that you're targeting and hold their hand as you whisper in their ear, "I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me." And you're unable to go below 1 HP for 10 seconds. There are a couple of downsides to Holmgang. This button does have a range because you have to hold hands. So I also have a macro for this to avoid degenerate hand holding and to avoid the once in a blue moon use case where I want to Holmgang and I have to be like 20 miles away from the enemy that I'm targeting and I don't want to be told that I'm too far away to refuse to die. You will also lose the effect of Holmgang if the target that you're holding hands with dies. You can also just deselect the enemy manually before using Holmgang. You don't have to use a macro to solve this problem. Holmgang has the shortest cooldown of all invulns in Final Fantasy XIV, and there is at least one fight in every Savage tier where you can abuse the fuck out of its cooldown, so make sure to do that. You can even use it in trash pulls when your healer goes AFK and you can just chill at 1 HP for like 8 seconds before healing yourself back up to full with Bloodwhetting. With all that information overload, I can go over a boring opener and single target shenanigans. But first, I'm going to interrupt this broadcast to tell you to feel free to support the channel, or feel premium to support the channel. Although Warrior is straightforward, I always like to fact-check myself with the experts, who in this case is one Maya, who also helped ghostwrite my previous Warrior guide, and I also do some research on the balance. In any case, if you have multiple tanks in an instance, you are going to need to determine who is taking all of the damage. It's going to be you because you're a warrior who doesn't give a fuck about taking damage. But only one of you should have your tank stance on at the start. Off tanks can usually turn their stance on about 30 seconds into combat, but who's counting? We are going to pull the boss with our range skill first to make this nice and easy. But this is a 0.001% damage loss. Oh no. So get that countdown ready, and you don't need to do anything special except press Tomahawk right as the battle timer finishes. Alright, this is post-editing chair here. I'm going to interrupt this opener and make this nice and confusing, but I want to let you know that Tomahawk is a little bit of a weird skill. So the damage for it comes out a little bit later after you press the button. You can see this happening as I press it right as the battle timer hits 0, and other people on my team take some boss damage because of this. So it's okay to Tomahawk a little early at like 1 second left on the battle timer to try not to kill your team. But anyways, press Tomahawk and immediately weave Infuriate as soon as you can. You have to be considered in combat to be able to press this button, so if it doesn't work right here, just weave it a GCD later, it's not that big of a deal. We then press Heavy Swing, and then press Maim. This is when you can take some damage drugs. Press Storm's Eye to get your damage buff, and now press Inner Chaos. Note that Fell Cleave turned into Inner Chaos after you pressed Infuriate. Now double weave Upheaval and Inner Release. We press Primal Rend here, which is a gap closer. We like gap closers so much that we also weave Onslaught here as well. Then press Fell Cleave and weave another Onslaught. And press Fell Cleave and weave another Onslaught. And press Fell Cleave and then weave Infuriate and press Inner Chaos. From here, we're pretty much already into filler, but if you're curious about maximizing your damage drugs, you use a Storm's Path combo, and then get another Fell Cleave, where you weave Infuriate and press Inner Chaos afterwards. If you pressed everything correctly and didn't drift your GCD at all, your damage drug should fall off right after this last Inner Chaos cast. And then use the Storm's Eye combo and press Upheaval, usually right before that Storm's Eye, depending on your skill speed. Alright, with an opener out of the way, allow me to explain some flexibility. Primal Rend is a button that you can press anytime after you press Inner Release. It does not consume stacks of Inner Release either, you don't have to worry about that. It is a gap closer though, which means that you will rush to the boss and you will be locked in place ever so slightly. You're also only able to single weave after it. Because of all of this, depending on the encounter, you might want to use Primal Rend a little bit later to avoid getting hit by a mechanic. Keep in mind that you can hold Primal Rend for up to 30 seconds, and it is your preferred gap closer in most situations, especially outside of 2-minute raid buff windows. Generally, you're trying to hit 3 Inner Release Fel Cleaves, a Primal Rend, an Upheaval, and some amount of Inner Chaos around your burst window, as well as technically 3 Onslaughts in a 2-minute burst window and 1 Onslaught in a 1-minute burst window, but you can decide how you want to spend those gap closers for mobility and damage. I usually just end up using 2 Onslaughts during each Inner Release if I don't need to hold it for a mechanic, because it makes everything nice and simple, just like my brain. As far as actual filler goes, you do have 2 different combo buttons to press as the third button of your filler combo. Storm's Eye gives you a buff for 30 seconds, and you generally want to use that if the buff has less than 15 seconds remaining. Otherwise, just use the Storm's Path combo. These combos will give you meter to press Fel Cleave. A Storm's Eye combo gives you 20 meter, and a Storm's Path combo gives you 30 meter. Since we're going smooth brain here, you can just press Fel Cleave anytime after you have at least 50 meter. Just make sure that you don't overfill the meter when you go to press Infuriate. Pressing Fel Cleave and all of the variants, not Primal Rend, will reduce Infuriate's cooldown by 5 seconds. This isn't a problem if you just want to Oonga Boonga and press Infuriate on cooldown, but if you want to play a little bit better and try to hit Inner Chaos inside of raid buffs, there is a chance that you might be about to get a second charge right before Inner Release comes up, and you make a small mistake and drift your Infuriate cooldown a little bit, and this doesn't have really serious consequences, but it is something that you're trying to avoid. You're also going to have to press Upheaval on cooldown, which comes up every 30 seconds. It doesn't have any meter management associated with it, so just stay on top of the cooldown. And that's pretty much all there is to Warrior Filler. It's really not that big of a deal. I am going to include some silly knowledge and other somewhat important details. I have mentioned the healing from Bloodwhetting at least a few times already, and since this is a button that just has a raw heal associated with it, that means that it shouldn't matter what GCD you use to heal from, right? Well, actually no. One silly thing about using either Inner Chaos or Primal Rend or Chaotic Cyclone is that any of these will guarantee that the heal that you get from Bloodwhetting will be a crit heal for that GCD. While it will work on these buttons, this does not apply to using buttons with Inner Release. It's not a bad thing to know if you want to maximize some extra healing when you can. But it is probably better to know that you want to use Bloodwhetting right before you land your first GCD, in order to land 4 GCDs in total under its buff. This can take a little bit of practice, and it's not going to matter too much in trash pulls, but it is a good habit to build. Also, Inner Release, in addition to making you do damage, it also makes you immune to certain debuffs, most important of which is knockback immunity. You're not going to use Inner Release to ignore knockback mechanics since you're going to just use it on cooldown for damage, but keep it in the back of your mind that you might completely dodge a mechanic while Inner Release is active and throw yourself off if you're not paying attention. Now that I got past important information, since this is the Warrior video, I might as well talk about some nerdy shit. Warrior does have a couple of quirks. Since most of its damage output comes from moves that are guaranteed critical direct hits, in terms of stat priorities, Warrior will look a little different from every other tank, which usually have very similar gear sets instead. This isn't that big of a deal, especially in something like casual content, as you're not going to get super punished for using a general tanking set on Warrior. But if you plan to play mostly Warrior, especially in something like Savage, it's good to keep in mind that you're pretty much going to be shoehorned into playing mostly Warrior, and that it can be a little bit weird to switch off of it. This also means that when it comes to raiding, buffs that increase crit and direct hit chance Warrior doesn't really benefit that much from them. Also, thanks to 2-minute timings being normalized, these buffs are even worse for Warrior than they were in the past. So the things that you're kind of looking out for would be Scholar's Chain Stratagem, Dragoon's Battle Litany, and Bard's Battle Voice. And 2 of Bard's songs. Warrior is also very low on the dance partner priority list. It's not going to matter that much because buffing a tank's damage is not the make or break between party comps. But optimizers tend to get mad if they see a Warrior and they play Scholar. If you're a Scholar player, you shouldn't get mad because you're not even part of a group that's good enough to even give a shit. Or you can just play Sage. Also, since Bard is extremely popular right now, thankfully you do still get a benefit from their Radiant Finale, so it's not like it's a complete loss. In terms of tank damage output, Warrior is not the best, but it's also not the worst either right now. However, contrary to what some nerd will tell you, damage is not the only thing that matters when it comes to tanks. You don't take Warrior because of its raw damage output, you take it for sustain and making progression way easier on your healers. Any rating progression group will tell you that Warrior can make things much simpler and much more comfortable. Most of the time, tank damage isn't the difference to get it clear, but easily living through a bunch of damage, that could be immensely helpful for progression. And while Warrior isn't often taken into optimized play, don't let that discourage you from playing it in something like Savage or Ultimate. It is still very useful. We are now at the conclusion. Yeah, Warrior is still pretty much just the monkey tank. If you're a casual player who mostly goes through dungeon content, you're going to love it. It's not even a close competition between Warrior and every other tank job in Trash Pulls. Although even if you're trying to clear the current Savage tier or even the next Ultimate, it's still incredibly useful for learning a hard fight, both because of what it brings to the table and because it's slightly easier to pick up and play. I don't think its rotation is super fun, it's usually the mitigation that makes it feel good. I'm still probably going to play Gunbreaker for tanking purposes because weaving gives me even more happy chemicals than Warrior does. Now let's get out there and make healers feel useless in casual content.